Welcome everyone, my name is Nina Benoit, I'm the Director of Sustainability at Brightest and the host of the AI Sustainability Podcast. So for first-time listeners, this podcast talks about all things related to artificial intelligence and sustainability, exploring how AI can have a positive impact on our planet and our people, but also what are potential limitations or threats that we need to be aware of. So today I have the pleasure of welcoming Suzana Carp, a leading voice in the European climate policy. Suzana has worked with some of the EU most influential green regulations and is now the co-founder of Clean Tech for CEE, which is really helping to accelerate clean innovation in Central and Eastern Europe. So Suzana, thank you so much for being here with us today. It really is an honor to have you on the podcast, and I'm happy we managed to schedule it and that we can hear more about your expertise today. So could you maybe tell us a bit more about you and what kind of projects you're working on at the moment?
Of course, and good morning, good day, or good evening. And thank you so much, Nina, for inviting me on your podcast. I think this is a great initiative because indeed we see that AI topics are really picking up, innovation is advancing, and we need to have all of these conversations that in some way require time. So thanks to all of our listeners, also for the time that they will dedicate to our conversation. But it is really important to analyze what is happening and how can we best, set the puzzle pieces so that we end up with a beautiful societal picture going forward as opposed to a chaotic one. A little bit about myself. So I have started working on climate policies in the lead up to the Paris Agreement. And my first posting in Brussels, so to say, because I was sent here by a British think tank called Sandbag Climate Campaign, which has been rebranded as Ember in the meantime, and which has also opened a European office, which continues to be called Sandbag. But so they, after the conclusion of the Paris Agreement in December 2015, they decided it was time to invest in opening a Brussels office, exactly focused on helping or supporting or guiding European legislation to be fit for purpose in the face of translating the Paris Agreement into legislative language and allowing implementation that yields emission reductions and supports that level of ambition we've all agreed on. Okay, so I then moved in January 2016 to Brussels to start the Brussels office. As I said, sorry to repeat myself, but the reason I keep going back to the start is because it's nearly a decade-long journey now. And so I've gone through multiple phases in my career. So the first couple of years were focused even on Paris Agreement ratification. It wasn't a given, even if all the EU member states had signed on to it. So, we're a part of the agreement, but they still had to ratify it. The European Union had to ratify it. At the same time, we were revising the EU ETS, so the European carbon market, which is, at the time when it was launched, it was an innovative piece of legislation, first of a kind in the world, quite similar, because we'll talk later about the AI Act, which is also a first of a kind framework in the world. So, we can learn a lot from the experience in being leaders when it comes to climate legislation and hopefully apply that to being leaders on AI legislation going forward. But so the multiple phases, have meant, let's say, building a European climate law. I was actively involved in that, advising governments as well, the European Council. So very interesting 10 years. But over the last couple of them, I realized that, it's important to work on legislation, but it's also really important to have real life deployment of solutions, real life deployment of technologies. And so that's when I changed my focus towards clean tech or green tech or deep tech in the climate and energy space, however you wish to call it. But because it's, of course, these technologies that will be the ones reducing emissions, right? And so, as you rightfully introduced at the start, lately, this year in 2025, I co-founded Cleantech for Central and Eastern Europe, having identified this region, which is quite a big geographical region. So starting from the Czech Republic, all the way to Bulgaria, Moldova, Ukraine, but so, including the southeastern part of Europe, so Western Balkans, Greece, Cyprus. This is a huge area, and it can be a huge leverage of change and really help us jumpstart or jump ahead of the innovation race, both on clean tech, but I believe also on AI.
Absolutely. And I think it also very inclusive in the sense that a lot of things are happening more in Western Europe, right? And I think sometimes we're not including everyone within the EU. So that's definitely very exciting to hear that you're working on that. And so you mentioned what you did with ETS, so with emissions trading system, within your role as a European climate policy specialist. And also the EU Green Deal. So it would be great if you could tell us a bit more about that. And what I would like to understand is what kind of regulatory frameworks could we imagine, or maybe are already being discussed, to ensure that AI can support environmental goals that we have set in the EU already?
Great. I'll start with your last question because that will frame the other two. So I think what we actually need is innovative legislative frameworks. Think outside of the box legislative frameworks. And that's what we did on the carbon market. As well. And so at the time when I moved to Brussels in 2016, the price for a ton of CO2 or CO2 equivalent was €5 per ton. It was, less than a vegan burger, and or even much more less than a meat burger. So um, it was non-significant. However, the companies in Europe were anticipating the price would go up. So they were working with internal carbon prices, which were actually much higher than the market price. But of course, the absence of a price was yielding investment decisions or like guiding them in the wrong direction. Because the reason why we need pricing on greenhouse gas emissions is to try to correct the market imbalances that were created when, let's say, the world was not aware of the greenhouse gas effect. Or maybe some were aware. Actually, the oil and gas industry was aware. We have this evidence from the 70s, but they didn't act on it. So now we have to not only fix the economy, but create a bit of a kind of plug-in catalyst into the carbon market that helps us win the lost time. So how can we do that? On the carbon market, we did that with dynamic pricing. So this is a cool story. When I moved to Brussels, the idea was that the carbon market was so broken that our NGO was actually saying, fix it or ditch it. Because if it continues to be so broken, you might as well get rid of it and then do something else, right? Like direct legislation, phasing out certain technologies, I don't know, a multitude of other options. But we did manage to fix it with the help of member states in particular. So governments in Europe understood how serious the situation was, and they have agreed. So I was advocating, for this idea of rebasing the carbon market. So giving it a new base, starting fresh from real emission levels. Why? Because somehow, even if we created an ambitious policy, we wanted to make it so comfortable for the incumbents, for the economy, not to stress anybody out, that we had put a cap way above emission levels. So emissions were actually already below what this carbon market was trying to limit. So I was advocating for bringing the two together. So, the cap should be where emissions are, and it should adjust automatically. And so that's what we managed to achieve to a large extent. After 2 years of work on this, the EU governments agreed to create a dynamic pricing. So they cancel ETS allowances from a stability reserve, not directly from the market, but it's a market stability reserve. So let's say from the savings account, but by canceling them in relation to real emission levels, what we're actually doing is we're canceling from the future to make up for the lost time. So we make sure that after 2050, there's no more allowances coming back on the market and unsettling prices today. Because of course, those who buy these permits, they plan for the long term. They plan for after 2050. And so what drove the price up to eventually €100 per ton of CO2 equivalent in February 2024, first of a kind in the world. But what drove the price up was this long-term scarcity expectation. So we managed to create a dynamic adjustment in the price, which is great. This is exactly what the price is meant to tell us. It's meant to tell us the future on this planet will be quite expensive. And if we pay more today on our carbon emissions, we can hope to make it more bearable. But also, guess what? We build all these revenues, we can invest further in innovation. So in a way, the established economy creates revenues for funding innovation. And the higher the carbon price, the higher these revenues. So member states have collected billions of euros by now, money which is in principle meant to go back to climate investments or climate-friendly investments.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your answer. And I think indeed that can be also applicable to AI, right? In trying to think out of the box and try to replicate that a little bit. And so beyond the environmental impact of AI, and we've talked a bit about that already in a previous episode. There's also questions about data justice, right? Transparency and also algorithmic bias. Do you think there's any existing policies in the EU that are equipped to handle those ethical aspects? Or do you think there is the need for distinct AI ethics policy that would include those topics?
Okay, so let's say we already have the EU AI Act, which gives us a very good starting point, as well as we have a monitoring committee of how this act will be implemented. And since you've covered already some of these topics, I think when you talk about, then let's focus on the ones you brought up now. So I won't focus on sustainability, but on the notion of, AI justice and data justice, we actually know that unfortunately, in the EU, when the digital developments, the digital decade started more than a decade ago, nearly, there were also concerns about digital divide and sort of the lack of justice in digital education or access to digital means. And most of the studies showed that this hasn't been fully addressed. So now we're adding an additional layer by introducing the AI revolution. So, it hasn't been addressed it's been addressed in many ways, but again, there's still a large portion of the EU population, nearly half, which does not have exposure to digital education as such, and also more than half of people who don't have education on how digital applications work, right? So one thing is to know how to use digital applications, including AI, and the other thing is to really understand how they work. So the best misunderstanding we all have been aware of by now in 2025 is the misunderstanding of what ChatGPT does or what ChatGPT is. And there is a real risk there because not understanding its actual function, many people are using it and incorporating it into their work in ways which are not actually suitable to what this platform was meant to offer. Right, because it's a generative AI. It's not in any way a search function. It's not, of course, it builds on what is available online. That is the point. It's trained on the data available. So it has this component in it, but it's used in very different ways than it was intended. And so, to some extent, I think this exacerbates AI and digitalization access injustice, because the conversations we need to have and the policies we need to have at country level or at local level even, there's nothing to prevent a city hall or a school to host a debate on AI, invite some experts, they can connect online, to explain how this actually works so that people are not misguided. Now, of course, the EU AI Act does its very best to avoid that people are misguided, which is why it's a great step in the right direction. So the idea of labeling AI content is really good. The idea of having transparency over the training of it and sort of kind of the purpose. So knowing more about the AI is important. Data traceability, really important, but it's not fully enough for citizens because simply labeling something as AI doesn't tell you which part of it was AI. Was it all AI? And then it doesn't tell you what sense to make of that, right? So what does that, it's only letting you know AI was used, which is a great thing, but I think it causes then and invites a conversation on AI ethics. How much should the consumers and citizens be informed about, and how much can we assume it's just built into, well, if you use this innovation, we presume you've also informed yourself about it, right? So this is one conversation to be had. And then many other ones I think are looming into our horizon as well. You've referred to some of them. We can go into more depth if you want, but I'm also mindful of time, so I'll let you pick if you want to talk of a specific topic more.
I think what would be really interesting, and thank you so much for your answer. Maybe some listeners are not very familiar with the EU AI Act, so maybe it would be helpful if you could give a brief overview of what it entails so that people understand a bit more. What is the purpose of it and how is it helping with this problematic right now?
Okay, great. So happy to. I'll try to keep it very short, also to avoid losing a bit the focus, the sharp focus of this podcast. But so on one hand, it's the world's first AI comprehensive legislative framework. So that's really important because of all the notions of, kind of if Europe is a leader on legislation, even if it sounds a bit boring, legislation is boring, actually it's not, because it sets the rules of the game. And then, the match is on, the game is on, right? So same for tennis. We couldn't have tennis games without tennis rules that are internationally acknowledged. And then we all get to enjoy taking part in the joys of tennis or any other sport, right? So it's a bit like that as well, right? So it sets really the foundation for a normative framing of AI, hopefully, certainly at European level, but European level we know means European level and partners very often. And when we look at the partners, we realize, where we're talking of maybe a quarter of the world's countries that normally adopt the the EU acquis. So we can expect the same will happen on AI. So maybe a quarter of the world or to a half will be using this AI framework, the EU AI Act, as guidance. That's really important. It started in 2021 and was only finalized in the summer of 2024, which also goes to tell us just how complex this is, right? I mean, on EU green policies, the EU Green Deal was concluded actually faster than the EU AI Act because it was launched in the summer of 2020 and in multiple series of launches, but then it was concluded within the framework of 2 years. So we see that this took longer and it's only a conversation starter. Part of that is because as we're trying to legislate about AI, developments keep happening. So it's very hard to legislate while the field is growing and advancing so quickly. And that's why I come back to the previous point. Innovative and dynamic legislation is key. Now, is the EU AI Act a dynamic and innovative legislation? I think not yet, because that's not what it tried to do. It tried to really set the basis for the AI conversation. So it has great provisions on transparency. And of course, there's voices asking for even more transparency on AI, especially training and usage. But at the same time, the EU AI Act is trying to balance such requirements with the need to innovate and scale AI innovation. So it's also allowing AI innovation developers to work within kind of a safe space created by member states, by in line with these provisions of the AI Act, so they can keep innovating quickly, but in a way that is mindful of the legislation. So, for example, it has a clear ban on anything that promotes illegal content, right, or harmful content. And there's examples of that. What would be harmful content? And of course, it's content that encourages citizens or consumers to create damage either to themselves or to those around them. So this is banned. We know this. It's and also other illegal activities are banned, so they can't be introduced into AI applications. However, there's still a space of testing the AI and needing to train it that takes place, let's say, in a more, you'd say, experimental legislative, kind of a sandbox type of setup. Not fully a sandbox, but still, it has components of allowing for innovation and experiments to be carried out, given that it has the robust framing of, nothing illegal, transparency on the training, as well as other aspects. So it's interesting in that way. It tried to seek a balance, find a balance between these elements, something that the European Union is, of course, well trained in doing. Um, is it the right balance? I think there we would have different views, right? There's those wanting for the EU to be innovating quicker, to be more competitive, saying that maybe the EU AI Act is constraining them. I don't believe that, because I believe in innovation with a purpose, right? And so it's important that we're also developing the AI, not just to develop it, but also because we're trying to solve real problems in our societies. And I think that's what the EU AI Act does. It's creating a bit of a buffer between kind of, let's say, certain areas where it's nearly pointless to focus the AI on because, it's illegal content, or so we know it would be harmful. So then let's try to channel it and focus it on where we do need additional support in solving some of our societal problems, right? So one of these aspects is the energy transition. The AI could potentially, so AI applications could potentially help us accelerate the energy transition. However, in the meantime, they're only accelerating our electricity usage. So this needs to be understood and managed. In April, so last month, 2025, we saw the International Energy Agency releasing a report exactly on the use of electricity by AI applications. So very interesting, because to some extent it predicts that in the long term, um, the sort of consumption, the savings that AI uses will encourage will overtake the increased usage at this point in time. However, that's not telling the full story, because it's not telling the story that climate change is accelerating faster than we ever expected it to accelerate, meaning that the next 5 years are critical. So it matters what we do in the next 5 years, how much more data infrastructure we develop in Europe, where the electricity is sourced. And here, I think we could use innovative legislative elements from, for example, we had this Renewable Hydrogen Act, which talked about additionality. This was a great win for the European Union to say, when you develop green hydrogen, you should also develop additional capacity for it. And it's the same, I would say, legal principle that can now be applied to data centers or expanded data infrastructure. So when you develop it and add it, you should also commit to installing on the grid within 2 years, it's the same legislative principle, the additional amount of electricity that you will be using.
Yep. Absolutely, absolutely. We're running out of time, Suzana, but this has been such an interesting conversation. And thankfully, the next episode will be exactly about this topic, so about energy and what are the applications, and also what is the problem with AI in terms of, consumption. So I think this is a very interesting topic to talk about, and all your insights have been really great for listeners to understand a bit more how policy can be used, and I hope we will see a lot more of that. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on how policies can make AI more sustainable and how we can use best practices from Europe to replicate that.
Yes, thank you so much, Nina, and thank you to our listeners. Please keep following this podcast. And to also conclude, I think, yes, we do need an ethics revolution for AI. I think the EU has set the course, but it also needs to keep leading. So it needs to not forget that it's, bound by some fundamental values connected to our treaties. And what a better way to, promote these values externally, globally, than driving on the AI ethics discussion. And to be good players, to be in a strong enough position to drive on that, we need to keep innovating. So, yes, thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast. It's been absolutely great.
Of course. It's been a pleasure. And so for the listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it, comment, also connect with Suzana or myself on LinkedIn. My name is Nina Benoit, and this is the AI Sustainability Podcast. See you next time.